Bad date stories are always good for a laugh, and it almost feels like it's a rite of passage. But bad doctor appointments, not so much. Whether it's a doctor who rushed your appointment, belittled your symptoms, or hit you with a surprise bill, you shouldn't have to settle for mediocre care. But now, thanks to ZocDoc, you don't have to. You've got options. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click instantly to book an appointment. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty. You can filter for doctors who take your insurance, are located nearby, and are a good fit for any medical need you have. And appointments made through ZocDoc also happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/female to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/female. ZocDoc.com/female.
And we're recording, and good to see everybody. We're back with Mike and Ken for My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz. Episode 37 hours of this stuff we've been doing.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. So wanted to start off and tell some of our listeners and viewers that we're based in Southern California, and so I think if you're been sleeping under a rock for the past 2 weeks, you're not aware what's going on, but everybody knows what's going on. We've been having rash of wildfires down here. It's been horrible. We've had friends lose houses. We have friends, family members lose houses, both in Altadena and also in the Pacific Palisades. And the last week was very kind of screwed up. We lost power quite a few times.
But we've been very lucky. I mean, we're very grateful. Lucky. We didn't have to evacuate, and our home is safe. And for all those people that lost their homes, it's just devastating. It's been devastating. Very tragic. The city has been under immense distress for the past week. And today we're supposed to be getting high winds as well. So there's a lot of anxious energy.
Yeah.
We will put in the show notes. There is a GoFundMe for a colleague and a friend of ours. His mother lost her home in the Pacific Palisades fire. She's 77 years old. She barely got out of there with her life and her dog. She was running for her life. It was horrifying. So any dollar counts, even if it's $5, anything can help. Yeah. So we just implore you. This is a real GoFundMe. I know there's a lot of scams out there, but this woman needs help. So we said we would put it in the show notes. And
also, did we put it on
and I put it on Facebook on the podcast page. Yeah. And anyone else, I mean, anything you can do to volunteer or send anything. People need stuff. I mean, they're overwhelmed right now with donations, but it's always good to check in and see what else they need, because these people lost everything, and it's just heartbreaking.
And this is like, we're not out of the water yet, because, we're supposed to get like 50, 60 mile an hour winds today. And anybody who knows anything about Southern California, that's when they start the strangest things. I mean, they're trying to figure out what started there, whether it was a homeless person, whether it was just I think in Altadena, I do believe they found out it was a power line that started it. But anything can really start these things. I've heard like years ago, like a hawk flew into a power line, caught on fire, and then that started it. A little piece of broken glass on the near a piece of brush that was magnified through the sun, that started it.
But this week we had 100-mile-an-hour winds, like a hurricane force winds. We've never had that. When we first moved into this house, we had massive fires that I could see out the window, which were terrifying. But we didn't have that wind. This past week we had hurricane force winds, tornado winds. I mean, it's been unprecedented and scary.
Yeah. So that's why it was a little crazy last week. So if you didn't see our podcast on one of the platforms, we were having issues because we were losing power a lot, and we were operating off a generator. So hopefully that doesn't happen this week. We've been told that our power could go off at any time. Right now, we know some parts of our town are off. They haven't had power in a week. So bear with us. We're getting back on track. And hopefully we'll be able to get through this podcast without losing the power.
We're lucky the Hearst fire, which was the closest one to us, the one that we almost had to evacuate for in the middle of the night, is out. So we're very
Nice,
grateful to the
nice.
first responders and the firefighters and all those amazing people who are fighting these really
Yeah.
scary fires. I mean, they're just incredible people. And we
And they're
thank
overwhelmed.
them.
They're overwhelmed.
We thank them so much for saving our little town. So
Mhm. Yeah. But getting back to Alcatraz, we got we're going to talk about a couple things today. But what I think is really interesting, and we can talk about, because we have a couple things, like Ken has been speaking with the retired marshal who's helping us on the case. He was actually down in Florida. He had a Zoom call with him, and he's going to give us some information on what happened there. And then Mike actually talked to Herman the German, the last living remaining guard from Alcatraz. He's still alive. Mike talked to him over the phone. We're going to try to do a recording with him, a phone recording with him. But I know you only talked to him for a few minutes, but tell us what it was like, Mike. What did he have to say?
Yeah, so we got the number from Amanda, who was on the show a couple of months ago. She works with the Park Services. They had done an interview with him about a year ago. He lives, I think, in Nevada somewhere, and we were surprised that he was still alive. We thought that, because I think he's 94, 95 now, and obviously quite elderly. And I think there are just a few guards left and a couple of inmates.
One just died last week.
Right. Yeah. One of the guards died. Yeah. January 2nd, I think it was. And actually on the Alcatraz website where it was posted, they said he was the last living guard. And I immediately replied. I said, no, I know there's at least another one. And that's Charles Herman. And anyway, so, obviously with this podcast, we want to get as many, people on here that have direct information about Alcatraz and the escape. And we've reached out to a lot of people, some who've come on the show, some, who have declined. But so we thought, hey, maybe Amanda can get us his number. And she did. And so we called him up, or actually I called him up and answered the phone. And I was quite surprised because we were a little unsure of the phone number because we were kind of having some issues with the phone number and finally got the right number. So I wasn't sure if that was the proper number, if it was somebody else's number, kind of like what we did with Al, the guy at Kilby Prison, same kind of number issue. Anyway, he answered the phone and I introduced myself. Obviously, he didn't know who I was. Now he is 94, 95, so he's hard of hearing and he's an elderly person, so it's you kind of have to repeat yourself a few times for him to understand what you're saying. But we did talk for a few minutes, and at the end of it he was like, okay, I think I'm done now. And it's like, you want to be respectful because I'm sort of intruding into his life unexpectedly. Anyway, so he did say a few interesting things. When I did get him, I thought I'm going to try to ask him as many questions as I can for as long as I can. And I'm glad I did because it was a shorter call than I was expecting. But one of the questions that I asked him was, did he know Mickey Cohen, who was an inmate at the time with the escapees? And he says, oh, yes. Oh, Mickey. Yes, I know Mickey Cohen. He was quite familiar with him. And he said that he was actually the one that brought him to the island, that when Mickey Cohen arrived at Alcatraz, I believe it was in October of 61. He was there at the dock to meet with him. And as he put it, his girlfriend, not Candy Barr, as he had moved on to somebody else at this point, was with him at the dock. And as he put it, he was wearing a $5,000 suit. As you would expect from Mickey Cohen, he was known for his fashion and style. And they said their goodbyes to each other at the dock. And then he got on the boat and Charles Herman was there to escort him to Alcatraz, and where he was eventually processed. And, we've talked a little bit about his life there after that, but I didn't know that Charles Herman was the guy that was there to bring him to the prison, which was, I found to be interesting.
Yeah.
Now I did ask him if he was friends or had, any kind of a relationship with, John and Clarance Anglin and Frank Morris. And he was not aware of anything like that. He didn't deny to say, no, it wasn't true, but he says, I don't know. I don't know if they were friends, if they knew each other. So he couldn't corroborate that part of the story for us. which was unfortunate. I wish he was able to say something about that, but he didn't. Obviously, as a guard, you're not trying to make friends with the inmates, or you're not hanging out with them. You treat them all the same as one large group of criminals. So you're just sort of making sure they just stay out of trouble, and you do your head counts every day, and that's what the guards are most concerned about. So he couldn't corroborate that. He also talked about which he had mentioned also with Amanda, when she was interviewing him had interviewed him last year. And he said that the night of the escape, when he heard the noise on the roof, that he immediately reported it to the gunnery, I guess where several of the guards were, and told him, "Hey, I heard something." And as he put it, they didn't do anything. They didn't respond. They didn't act on it. They didn't investigate. And later, when obviously after the escape had happened, and as often whenever there's any kind of disaster, we were talking about a little bit before, with the fires, with all these fires taking place, now that they're slowly gaining control, the questions are being asked, well, how did these fires start? And of course, people are pointing to somebody else as the cause of the fire. It's not our fault. We're innocent. It's, go talk to them. They're the ones that are responsible for this. And it was the same thing at Alcatraz. They everyone starts, ducking for cover because you don't want to be blamed for this, event. And so they eventually blamed him, that he was the one that was found culpable for the escape, because he was behind on his duties that night. He was checking out at 12 o'clock and there are certain requirements that they have to do during their shift, and they sign off on these things. Well, he didn't do the last head count. He signed off that he did, but he didn't actually do it. And somehow they found out that he didn't do it. And so they said, because of that, you're at fault. And he was suspended for 30 days. We have a letter from Warden Blackwell that says that, you dereliction of duty, kind of a letter. And he opposed this this punishment that he had to suffer through, saying it wasn't his fault, that it was a systems issue, that over the years that the wardens had taken away a lot of the powers and abilities that the guards had to make sure that the inmates were not doing anything they shouldn't be doing. One of the things he talked about before was that they used to have flashlights with them when they were doing their rounds at night, to kind of check on the cells to make sure, nothing was happening. And they took that away. The just sort of a lax attitude, that they were not as diligent in enforcing the rules on Alcatraz. Like in the early years, inmates couldn't even talk to each other. They couldn't speak except in the exercise yard. And now, years later, they relaxed that rule and other rules. So he felt that if it was more of a tight ship, this wouldn't have happened. And of course, the night of the escape, had they responded, they might have found him on the roof and prevented the escape from happening. So, he felt he did his job, and the administration felt differently. So, and to this day, you can tell when he talks about that part of it, and even also with the Amanda interview that he did, that he's still really hurt by that it's still a painful memory for him after 60 years that he was given the brunt of the blame. And actually in the Whitey Bulger letters that we have, unfortunately, Whitey being Whitey, he was really, really ribbing him about it the day after, saying that you're not going to move up, you're not going to make lieutenant, your career is over, they're going to blame you. And I'm sure other inmates were doing the same thing, because they knew that
they had leverage now.
Sure.
Right. And what can you do? They're going to just make fun of you because of what happened, whether you're guilty or not. But so I think he really absorbed that and still carries it to this day, because it was right after that point that he kind of wanted to end the phone call. I was sort of bringing up some bad memories for him, not intending to, but that's what happened. But the most interesting part of the conversation we had was about the raft. When, of course, when they escaped, they found, Clifford Fish interview that we have says that he and another guard found the raft on the beach of Angel Island. And Olaf was his name.
Olaf.
And they found the raft and they brought it back to Alcatraz. And Whitey had said in his letters that it was common knowledge around the prison that the raft had been found. And Clifford Fish had said that they brought it back to the pier and that the FBI and the administrators, administration of the prison were examining the raft. And then when he came back the next day, the raft was gone and it was never seen again or brought up again. And I asked, Charles Herman if he knew anything about the raft. And I said, did you know that the raft was found? He goes, oh yeah. I'd heard the raft was found and that it was brought back to Alcatraz. So he confirms that story. And I said, you know what happened to the raft, after it was brought back? He says, no, I don't know. I don't know what happened to it. So again, it's just very mysterious, vanishes, never explained, never talked about. It was just one of those things. And the guards moved on because obviously they were still dealing with the aftermath of the escape. But he does confirm that the raft was found and brought back to Alcatraz. So that's another confirmation of the story.
So going back just a little bit, did he say that he didn't do his job, or was he just told he wasn't doing his job when he did the count? He did the count and they told him it, or he didn't do it?
No, the part of the not doing it was not anything we discussed when I made the call. That's other information that we have. It was in the letter that it was that Warden Blackwell had written that he hadn't completed his duties that night.
Mm-hmm. But in general, though, he said he did his job.
Essentially, well, he did his job in that he reported something that was happening as it was happening. When he heard the noise on the roof, he immediately reported it. And that part is not in the letter. It's not mentioned anywhere else. That it's not in the FBI report. It's not in, like I said, Warden Blackwell's letter that that he had reported. And even in his rebuttal, he talks more about how he didn't have enough time to complete his duties. So he talks about it in a general sense. But it was, there were other things that were required of him and he just couldn't finish it. So he just signed off on it.
Yeah. And, independent of the fact that, he's 94 years old and, he was just, was he articulate? Was he lucid? Was he on point?
Yes, he was remembering these things. It would take a while to get the information because he was trying to remember these things. So as an older person, you're trying to sort of grab the memories. So, but yes, he was remembering it very clearly. He was giving me specific details. So cognitively, I think it's still there for him. It's just more of the kind of the emotions that are attached to those memories that are the hard part, I think. And so, and he says he doesn't like to talk on the phone. That was another reason why he cut it short. And so, perhaps, I think Ken's going to talk to him in the next day or so, hopefully, if he answers and is willing to talk, that maybe we can set up a time to meet with him as well. I think that's why Amanda went to go visit him, where I think he prefers the face-to-face. So hopefully we can do that as well on our part.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. It's very exciting. I mean, it's like you're talking to a time capsule.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime you had like that, there was a situation I remember, this is like almost 20 years ago. I had a friend of mine, his name is Kosh, and he's an artist, but he was also a television producer, but he was also, he used to design album covers. Like he designed, the Hotel California album cover, like he did like in the 70s, he did like all the major ones. So he's really a British guy. And he found out about this guy named Robert St. John, who was like a war correspondent from he covered every war from basically World War II all the way up to the Arab-Israeli wars. So, and he was like, so he was telling about it. He goes, I want to do a documentary about this guy. And he started telling me about it. He called me up. And I go, well, how old is this guy? I go, I'm looking at based upon what he covered. I go, he's got to be in his hundreds. He's got to be at least 100. He goes, yeah, he's 102. I go, well, is he still alive? He goes, yeah. He goes, well, I have to leave tomorrow to go interview him. Who knows what's going to happen. So we did. We flew down to Virginia, outside Virginia, and I spent 2 days with him, and it was amazing. The man was amazing. And I did 2 8-hour sit-down interviews with 102-year-old Robert St. John, and kind of basically I had 2 cameras on him, turned on him, and then just asked him a couple questions, and he just went. He just but the amount of like he would have like like a minute pause in between, like where he would stop and he would like that, but then he would go off for like another 45 minutes. And the recall, he couldn't remember what he had for breakfast, but he could detail all intimate details, like when he was in Poland, the same time the Nazis first rolled in, and he was staying at the same, because we weren't in the war yet. And so he could be over there, and he was covering stuff for the AP and whatever press that was there at that time. And so he got him and another British journalist who actually was a spy, because a lot of the journalists back there were also spies. And they got drunk, and they were staying in the same hotel as the German soldiers. And they had and he went into such detail with this stuff to where they got really drunk, and they came back, and the Germans always used to put their boots outside their room, and then the valet would come clean their boots. And this was like the night before they were going to invade Poland. And so they got all drunk, and they took all their boots and they threw them out into the street. And so they woke up the next morning, like, to all this chaos, and all the German soldiers were looking for their boots. All the officers were looking for their boots. They're outside trying to match them up and stuff like that. So he said him and this other journalist were single-handedly delayed the invasion of Poland just by that little. But just like those, it's so amazing how these people who lived to that age can remember all these amazing details and stories.
Well, like Ken's mom.
Your mom.
I mean, your mom was so lucid and just remembered things so clearly when she was so, coherently telling her story. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Right.
Yeah, when you gave
it is amazing how the long-term memory it's sharp.
Yeah.
The short-term memory, she can't remember what she did yesterday, but she
everybody
like
can. I can't, It's amazing how the brain works that way. But it's amazing that you were able to get him on the phone and and actually get him to kind of confirm some details. I mean, it's like, when does that happen? It's like no one even knew. Like, and you said before, they thought the oldest living guard died like on January 2nd, and now they don't. Obviously, who else could be still alive that worked at Alcatraz during that time? There could be other people out there.
Well, this actually proves that John could still be alive, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if you have a guard who was older than him still alive, John could definitely still be alive.
Sure. Yeah. It's a tough generation, those guys.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that was great. So, Ken, you're going to try to link up with him and hopefully talk to him as well. And then I think, I can't remember what she said, but I think I remember where Amanda said he lived in.
It was Las Vegas.
Was it Las Vegas?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he's not too far.
No.
So
yeah. And after I talked to him, if he's willing and open to having someone come talk to him in person, then I plan to fly out there, and I think Mike is going to join me.
We'll meet you out there.
We can all go out there.
Yeah. Well, we can definitely do that, and definitely get him on camera, hopefully.
I mean, he's like you said, he's a time capsule that probably has a lot of information that most people have never heard of, and you don't want it to just slip into history. And then you can't go back and ask him, once it's gone, it's gone. Yeah. So I say let's take advantage of it right now and find out. Who knows? He might have something that we didn't think about that we could look forward to in the future.
Yeah. So. And I do know, like, when you do those in-person one-on-ones, like, I wouldn't have been able to do a phone interview with this guy, the 100-year-old war correspondent. Right. I wouldn't have gotten the same level of detail and reaction, because then they can look you in the eyes, and there's definitely a connection that happens and helps them. And we've been interviewing people for 25, 30 years, and it's something, when you sit someone in that chair across from you, there's a magic that happens sometimes, that and the way they can access things. I don't think I've ever had someone kind of freeze up on it. I don't think you did when you're like that. They find it in their memories, and they want to express it. And it's different when they're just expressing it face to face, as opposed to a phone call, and stuff like that, which, you know, I get it. Yeah, like my dad used to hate talking on the phone because he used to have to talk on the phone for a living. So my phone calls with him, you know, in his later years was like, you know, you good? You good? Great. Here, talk to your mother. You know, it's like, you know, let's get off the phone as quickly as possible. So, well, that's exciting. That's exciting. And then you, Ken, also had some interesting interaction with our friend who's the retired U.S. Marshal who's been helping us down in South America with his contacts. And you were supposed to kind of link up in person, but it looked like you guys just were able to have a pretty detailed Zoom call with and connect with his other counterpart down in South America. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we started off on a Zoom call, but I only have the free version of Zoom. So after an hour, it dropped off and we wound up jumping back on WhatsApp. So that gives you an indication of how long we actually spoke. We probably maybe covered 2 hours. And first of all, I didn't realize how famous his cohort or his counterpart that he's working with in Argentina, who is retired, by the way, is. I mean, I didn't realize that he was the one who captured most of the Nazis in Brazil. This U.S. Marshal actually helped him on multiple occasions. So first of all, I was just like floored. Okay, I've heard of these people, but I've never actually met one. So it was really, really neat to know that I was talking to someone who knew what they were talking about when they said that we can find anybody that we need to find.
Yeah.
So we basically.
Well, let me stop you right there because I don't know how. I mean, depending on who our listeners are, but you know, just to give people just a little background, after World War II and we defeated the Nazis, there was quite a bit of them that fled to Brazil. And actually Brazil and Argentina, and they hit
Venezuela.
out Venezuela.
I mean, South America became a hotbed for Nazis.
Exactly. So that's why. And then they had to go hunt for them.
Yes, and I didn't realize it was to that level. I mean, I believe he said he captured over 100, and I don't know how many more are still there that he was looking for, but he had a very high success rate of capturing people. The U.S. Marshal. He blew me away just by his telling me that he was good friend with Wired Up's son. I was like, the famous lawman. He was like, yeah. He's like, I'm good friends with his son. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in the presence of like royalty here, But it was very good because they told me what they had done up to the point. They covered a large area of Brazil and the area that they were told to go look at and interview people. They didn't have a lot of good success in the areas that they went to, but there again, Brazil is a huge country. And so I was able with Zoom to show them the area that Breezy had shared with us, that this was the location. And we basically kind of started out with, what is a U.S. citizen, a guy like Brazil, Breezy, doing in that part of Brazil in the early 1970s? I mean, Mike and I, when we went to that part of Brazil, it was a little small town. I mean, I can't even imagine 50 years in the past what it was like. So what in the world was Fred Breezy doing there if he wasn't there to meet with someone? And so I did show them the house, the photos that Fred shared with the family in 1992 that he took. And I showed him the house that he took and said that the photo of the house and on the hill, and that Fred had said this was he didn't say that this was where they were currently living at. He said, this is the house that they started off with. So I showed him the street photo that I took with Google Street View back in 2017. And he agreed with me. He said, this looks very similar to the house that you're showing me that Fred gave me. He asked me, did we interview the individual that was living in it? And I told him, no, we didn't. We didn't actually interview him. We wanted to, but circumstances occurred, and we just didn't have the time. So he is interested in going back and talking to this individual. I did show him the photo of the two men by the anthill on the farm. He has seen that one before, and he agrees with me. That photo was taken in Brazil, no doubt about it. I mean, that anthill is exclusive to the Brazilian area. He did agree with us that point that we always thought was a river, which now we know is a road. He did agree that road that I identified was probably the road that was standing behind them. And when you take into account the location where Breezy said the Chevrolet plant was at, he's like, how in the world would someone even know that there was a Chevrolet plant there, even in 1992, when he was meeting with your family? I mean, how would he know that? Back then, 1992, the internet wasn't to the point where you could just Google something.
No.
So unless you were physically there, you did not know that. Also to know that there was a plant, a John Deere plant just down the road in another town. No one would have had knowledge of that either. So with those two pieces of information, he felt like we were in the right area. When I told him how large the farm was that Breezy said in square miles, I mean, we're not talking acres. According to Breezy, it was hundreds of miles. He looked at that area and he said, yeah, if you were going to have a farm that size that you're describing to me, this is the only area that I would have honed in on, based upon the other pieces of that we gave him that Breezy talked about. So with all that, he agreed that we need to have more boots on the ground there. We need to be going to local bars. We need to be going to local churches. And the reason I say churches is because, if you've read our book, you will know that John and Clarance came from a very religious background. At some point in time, I can promise you, I'm not saying they would have gone back to the same denomination that they grew up in, but I do believe that they would have had their children and or their grandchildren and or wives in churches, at some point in time. And so local churches, bars, people of that area, and I would go back to people that were, and I was conveying this to him, someone in their 70s, maybe in their 80s, they would remember a farm that employed over 800 people. I mean, you can't tell me 800 people work for this farm and no one's going to remember this, or the amount of John Deere tractors that they have. When I told him how many that Breezy said they had, 110, his first impression or first response to me was, that's crazy. No one has that many tractors, not even in large farms today. And I said, well, when I told him the size of the acreage, he goes, okay, well, I guess maybe that could be true. So, everything that I shared with him, he found very interesting, and he wants to continue working on it. Mm-hmm. So I believe our next step, is for us to truly go down and meet with him and explore the places that we know that is there based upon what Fred Breezy said. And I keep going back to Fred Breezy because, you have to, I've had people say, well, how can you trust what Fred said? And I agree. He was a criminal. He was a drug runner.
Sure.
The only one person that I've ever known that flew with Fred, who is still alive today, told me that Fred was a lot of things, but he wasn't a liar. Mm. But you still can't do away with the fact that he has photos of an area in Brazil that he should not have been at.
Right.
I mean, why was he there?
Right. And why would he lie to your family that he knew? Right. Doesn't make sense.
No.
I mean, why would you even bring it up? Like, if they escaped, right, and he didn't know anything about it, why would you inject yourself and cause attention to yourself and get involved? You wouldn't.
Well, and how did he know certain things about the escape that was only in the FBI reports that had not been released in 1992. He knew in his talk with the family, he talks about talking to John about the escape that night and how they got across. And he's the one who came back and said, okay, yeah, I know how you did it now, even though he was there. He brings in the ability to have a raft pulled behind one of the prison boats.
Mm-hmm.
The possibility of using one of the prison boats. Well, that was only talked about. The very first time you ever heard of it was in the FBI files when they're interviewing one of the inmates there. And he said that John told him early on that there was a possibility of using one of the prison boats. Now, how did Fred Breezy know this in 1992 unless John England told him?
Right.
Yeah.
Then you go into the clothes. He said that John told him, he said, why do you think we left our clothes on the banks that night? And I'm like going, wait a minute. There were no clothes left at the bank on Alcatraz. I mean, the only thing that was left on that beach was an extension cord, right? But he's not talking about it on Alcatraz. He's talking about when they get to shore. And then I was like, well, why would John and Clarence and Frank Morris take their clothes off? Well, John said that when they got to shore, and this is Fred, that they had clothes, new clothes to put on. They had money, and they had an ID and a passport waiting for them as soon as they got to the shore. But again, why would you take the clothes off? Well, if you had clothes that you had painted dark and you had the inside of it, coated down with cement, plastic cement to prevent water from coming in and out, I'm sure it probably wasn't a very comfortable thing to have on. So they shedded those as soon as they got there. So one will have to ask, did someone really find those clothes? I mean, is it possible that the FBI found more than just the raft? Did they find other pieces of clothing that they didn't disclose to anyone? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the whole thing about Fred Breezy is just, he's like, without Fred Breezy, you can't confirm a lot of this information, without,
Right.
I mean, that's at least all of us. I mean, that legendary, that the 2 times you met with your family in 92 and, or did he met twice, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. And this is where I wish we had a little bit more information. According to the only recording we had of Fred, and I listened to it the other day. Again, every time I listen to it, I hear things that Fred says that either I didn't hear the first time or it's just, okay, I don't think I ever heard him say that before. And I asked my mom this. So when he came to meet the family the first time in October of 92, they asked questions of the brothers and he recorded it down on a cassette tape. And the way that he was still communicating with them, even in 1992. So this wasn't a one-off in 1970. He was still in contact with them in 1992. He recorded it on a cassette tape and it was sent down. And according to him, it probably got recorded a couple more times before it made it down to them. They would answer back and it would come back the exact same way. He even talked about the individual who came by and picked the cassette tape up. He didn't know who the guy was, but they had a method of communicating.
So wait, let me stop you right there. So there could potentially be a tape out there with John and Clarence's voices on it, answering these questions.
Yes. And I asked my mom, first of all, I asked her, did they remember the questions that each of the family members asked? Because they were asking a question. Fred took those questions and sent them down to them to be answered. And he even says in this recording in December of 92, he said, I don't know whether or not they're going to respond or not. They might not answer your questions. And I asked my mom, did she ever hear anything back? And she said she didn't remember. And I even asked her, what question did you ask them? She didn't remember. So whether or not she truly doesn't remember, or if it's something she doesn't want to share, even with me, the whole point is Fred was still in contact with them in 1992. It wasn't like Fred went down in 1970 something and he happened to run into him in a bar. This was a one-off, you know, and then he met with him for a couple of hours and then he left. You know, what isn't told about the meeting with Fred Breezy and them, he was down there for 3 months. So it wasn't like it was, I went over there and spent the afternoon with him and we rode around and, you know, they showed me his farm and then I left. No, he was there for 3 months. And then now he's still in contact with him, according to him, in 1992. So the only thing I can say is that, you know, Fred shared things in that 92 meeting that was recorded that he should not have known. He should not have known about the airplane. You know, his knowledge of the airplane and where they were at when they landed and refueled just outside of Mexico City. Mm-hmm. John telling him about the prison boat, and that's what they used to come across with. John telling him about the clothing, the alternate clothing that John told another inmate that they were going to use. And then John even said that everything was contracted. The boat was contracted, the airplane was contracted, was set up and paid for. John is letting you know right then who paid for this stuff. The England family couldn't pay for it. Frank Morris didn't have any family, right? So who paid for all this stuff? Who's the only person that walked into the prison in a $5,000 suit?
Right. I mean, and they had already known
who paid for this.
He already knew that John and Clarance could grow his marijuana very well for him in Florida, much less in Brazil. Right.
Right.
So there's always a motive. I mean, it's not like he did it out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted them to work for him.
Right.
And he knew that it's the ultimate loyalty too.
Yeah.
You know, he would know those. They would
always be loyal to him, that he helped them get out of prison.
So go back to 1962 also now. How in the world did Uncle Man go to visit Alfred in prison in 1962, right after the escape? And how did he know Mickey Cohen?
Exactly. There was no internet. He couldn't look him up.
No.
There was
he might have seen him on well, you know what? At that time, I was going to say a TV show, but the England family, my grandmother and grandfather, Uncle Man and his wife were living with my grandparents. They did not own a TV at that time. They had a radio and they got the newspaper. So the only way that he could have ever heard the name Mickey Cohen would have been something on the news or over the radio or either in the newspaper, or maybe he heard somebody else say, why would you walk into a prison to visit your brother and tell him that Mickey Cohen supplied the boat?
He's just going to make that up. That makes no sense.
No.
He's not going to just make that up and tell his brother that. It's not like he's telling, a story to some random person. He's talking to his brother. Like, he's not going to.
Exactly.
Now, I just want to throw in another thing to add credibility to Fred Breezy's story to the England family, because a lot of people say, well, he made it up. Why he's just telling them a lie, because, like you said, he's a criminal. He doesn't know what the truth is. When we talked before about America's Most Wanted, when Fred Breezy hears about the Englands, and he misunderstands, he was kind of doing something that was in the background, and he thinks that they're caught, that they've been found. Mm-hmm. And he calls into the show to talk about, about them in South America. He corroborates elements of the story that he tells the family. So if he thinks that they've been found and he's sort of verifying, I met them down there, I was on their farm, and then, Art Roderick finds out about it and brings him in and
interrogates him
and asks him more, like, okay, tell us where it was. And of course his memory starts getting a little fuzzy at this point of, well, I can't tell you where they are, but if we go down there, I can show you where they are, kind of a thing. I can't point you to them. If he was lying to the family, why would he lie when he thinks they've been found, that he's corroborating the story? That makes absolutely no sense. So that goes back to the family of saying, he believed that he was with them. He believed that he did meet with them and has information because he says it twice. He says it to the family and he says it to America's Most Wanted. So absolutely that was the truth, because he's not trying to cover, he's not trying to tell a story that's not true when he thinks they've been found. So you understand, it makes no sense for him to lie at that point, because that would be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also makes sense. It also makes sense that the fact that when he's sitting in the chair across from Art, that, his memory gets selective, because now he realized, oh, wait a minute, they didn't find him. And he starts backpedaling.
Right. So that's something that I asked the U.S. Marshal that I was talking to this past weekend. Fred, in that 92 interview with the England family, he talks about when he gets caught. He talks about him coming in, as Mike said, cutting grass. He saw a show up on the TV. He thought that the England brothers had been caught, as Mike said, and so he calls into the show. They had a number flashing. He even tells the number in the interview, and so he calls in and he tells him. He said, "Hey, I'm calling in about the England brothers." So she said, "Well, hang on, I'm gonna put you on hold for a minute." And he said, after about 5 minutes, I realized, wait a minute, I've been on hold for 5 minutes. They traced my phone call, and that's when the U.S. Marshal comes on and basically starts asking him questions about it. And he was like, I thought they had been caught, and he said, I put my foot into a trap that I couldn't get out of. And he said that they came and picked me up and questioned me and polygraphed me. And I've asked Art about that. And Art denies that they did that. But I asked the U.S. Marshal this past week, I said, okay, let's see if what Fred Breezy is telling the truth. I'm not asking you to tell me what's on that polygraph, but can you tell me was he actually polygraphed? Because I believe he was.
Oh, absolutely.
I believe they picked him up and they polygraphed him. And I would like to at least know that Fred was truthful about that piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't have to tell me what happened. Just tell me, was he polygraphed or not?
I would say 100% he was polygraphed. Mm-hmm. They polygraph people for way less.
Yes.
Way less. And
you go back to when you talk about being polygraphed, out of all of the England family, only one member was polygraphed twice, and that was Uncle Man. He was polygraphed by the FBI and also by the U.S. Marshals. According to what Art told me when he took the case over, it would have been Art Roderick who polygraphed him. He never corroborates that actually happened, but I know it was in the 90s whenever Uncle Man was polygraphed. So he was picked up by two U.S. Marshals. He never said their names, but they took him somewhere, questioned him, never told him the result of the questioning. Did he pass or he didn't pass? And that's when he cracked that little smile and said, well, I'm not sure how I passed. Because someone asked him, so did you pass? And he goes, I'm not sure how I did that. So
even if he didn't,
told them, but
even if he didn't, I'm sure whatever he said either corroborated other stories or not. They're not going to release. Right. They never release the information. I mean, we deal with that on a daily basis with people getting polygraphed, trying to get trans. They go, well, they say it was inconclusive.
Inconclusive.
And they would never tell the person that they gave the polygraph whether or not they passed or not.
Inconclusive does not mean you
passed.
passed.
Would you? So out of 12 family members, why would you pick one family member to polygraph?
Exactly.
Not once, but twice. I mean, why didn't they polygraph my grandfather, my grandmother, or his even older brother than that, or sister? I mean, no. The only thing that I can think of, they had the FBI report where he went to Alfred and told Alfred who helped get them out. And then they have the information of Alfred telling him about, I've had contact with our brothers. So all of this pointed to Uncle Man, and he would be the only person they were interested
Yeah.
they knew that he knew where they
I
were at.
wish Uncle Man was still alive.
I know.
Me too. He was a now
God.
you think my mom was a character. He was a truly
No, I can tell. I can tell just from that, those photographs we saw him with the skip tracer guy, and the way he was describing him, and just you could tell he was like, that picture of him with the skip tracer. He almost looks like the Cheshire Cat. He just looks like you can tell in his eyes and the way he's posing with him. It's just like he knows.
He knew.
yes.
He knows what's going on. It's
Well, I mean,
crazy.
he even tells the skip chaser when he shows up. He said, "Are you here to capture my brothers?" He did. He knew they wasn't dead.
Right.
And then he even asked him. He said, what would you think if I showed you a postcard from Clarence that came from South America in Clarence's handwriting? The skip tracer offered to pay him $25,000 just to see it, and he wouldn't show it to him. So there's lots of pieces that Uncle Man had, and now, even though we don't have Uncle Man, we do have his voice on that recording with Fred Breezy.
Mm-hmm.
And what was amazing with Uncle Man was Uncle Man would say things on that recording that he should not have known. Like, for instance, someone asked him about, how would they have set up this escape? And Uncle Man says, "Oh, well, all they had to do was find someone who was leaving the island, and he could have brought information off the island." It's like, okay, the island only had 250 prisoners. Is that right, Mike? Probably at the max.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was small.
How often do you think someone was being let go? I mean, it's not like these big prisons today that they had someone moving in and out every single day.
Yeah.
I mean, 250 people, maybe once a year? So how in the world?
Well, even if you say like once every 2 months.
Yeah. How would you coordinate an escape like that? Unless the person that came out also went back in to take information back in. So, it was a one way. Hey, yeah, I can go out and meet and set things up, but the person on the inside would need to know, when do I coordinate this? Okay, you went out and set a boat and a plane up for me. When is it going to be there? So it had to be information that was brought back also.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And this $5,000 suit gangster, he not only comes back, comes to Alcatraz in 61, but he comes back in 62 also. So, and he brings that information. And like I said, we've shared it in before. He comes back. Was it May, Mark? It was May. And then the escape occurs, a few weeks later in June.
June, yeah.
So, I mean, you can, anyone with common sense can see that he brought back information that they used. And
they worked in the clothing room. He worked in the clothing room with John. So they had many opportunities to speak when he returned. And
it sounded like he gave them a timeline too. You got to do this. You got to do this now.
Well, we've talked before how they abandoned the original raft and made the new raft right after that.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they suddenly change? Because you only have limited resources. You only have so many raincoats you can use. So for them to abandon the raft that was completed or pretty close to completion.
Exactly.
And the raft is 14 feet long. It's a large raft.
Yeah.
And they completely abandoned
a
whole new raft in a few weeks. Well, that means they had information they didn't have before when Cohen returns. That alters their plan.
And we're able to get an unlimited supply of raincoats to kind of make another raft. I mean, that's like, that to me is like, how does that happen? I know they're working in the clothing room, but still.
And no one's going to notice all these raincoats gone.
Or the material.
And it talks about that we mentioned this before, that, in a given year, normally you'd maybe have 2 or 3 raincoats that need to be replaced. And, they had a supply of them. Well, in the months leading up to the escape, they had over 50 in about a 2-month period of 50 replacements. And the guy who was in charge of all the supplies didn't think something's going on here. He never questioned it. He just like, well, that's strange. All these raincoats are disappearing.
Right.
Crazy. Well, listen, it sounded like it was a pretty fruitful week for information and touching base. And I know we're gonna check back with Miguel when he gets back in town, and then we're still talking to a television network about getting this thing, made so we can actually do an updated version of this. So we actually have a meeting this week, don't we?
Yeah.
So fingers crossed that we can get them to pull the trigger on this, so we can get down there. But if not, we'll figure out a way how we can get down there. But it's good to see people who in the intelligence community who do this for a living, that they were pretty enamored with the information that you gave them, Ken. Because like when we were on that phone call with them before the end of the year, after, because we had sent them down there, and he said, well, we really didn't find anything. But then, unfortunately, they weren't armed with all the information they needed, and that and that's only because the initial group of the information that we gave them, they were like, oh wow, this is really good intel. I go, do you need any more? And he goes, no, I think we got enough. So they thought they had enough to go on. But now, after talking with you, Ken, and for 2 hours, and actually more than that, because we talked an hour.
They have more to do. There's a lot more to do.
Exactly.
Yes.
Even professional investigators like themselves are like, wow, wait a minute, we got a lot more that we can look at.
And they even said that, they could, believe it or not, and I've said this before, law enforcement can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
And they agree, I really believe that you need a family member, me and Mike and you and Cindy, we need to be involved in this down there in order to really find the people that we need to find to ultimately track down John and Clarance.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, in my experience, when we go into the field, that's how we get stuff done, face to face. We have to talk to people face to face, and once they see you and they trust you, then you get the information. And they don't trust law enforcement, and especially in Brazil. I mean, it's very
well in general. I mean,
it's even more down there that they're more suspicious of anyone with anything to do with.
If a cop knocked on my door right now and started asking me questions about things, that I'm like, I would be very reluctant to talk to them.
Sure,
especially about I mean, it's like, what is this about? And if they're being, because they're usually painfully cryptic and they're questioning, they don't tell you the whole thing, but also they just. Law enforcement smells like law enforcement. They come in the door, it's like it's intimidating, and it's not fun. So especially in an area where they don't really trust law enforcement down there.
Right. And I believe, as family oriented that most people in Brazil are, for them to realize that a family member is trying to track down relatives. I'm not there to arrest John and Clarance. I'm there to find them, find my cousins. Introduce, or hopefully, if John is still alive, let him, see his younger sisters before they die, before he dies. I mean, to me, I think that's a motivation that local people will connect with. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's got information is probably going to be more open to share it with me than they will any U.S. Marshal, any NFL person.
Well, good stuff. Good stuff. So we just have to put a pin in it for now, and we'll keep on going. And hopefully, we'll hear some more news and anything else that comes up. But good job, guys.
And we made it to the end of the episode. No power failure.
Exactly.
The
wind's pretty quiet. We're very, very lucky right now. So let's just keep our fingers crossed for all of Southern California that we do not have any more wind.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Talk to you next week.
Okay.
Stay safe.
Now Taxes is 100% free when you file in the TurboTax app if you didn't file with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Just do your own taxes in the app by 2/18.
What if I have lots of forms?
All good. All 100% free.
What if I had 3 jobs?
Still 100% free.
What if I once saw Bigfoot?
That has nothing to do with taxes, so still 100% free.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Now this is taxes. See if you qualify in the TurboTax app. Excludes TurboTax Live, must start and file in app by 2/18.